Hey Concordia, thanks for joining us for chapel today. I love what Newhouse said during his Easter message, and if you didn't get a chance to see it, today's passage from Hebrews 12 is going to help us to explore and highlight one of the major points he brought up. And that is that in the wake of Jesus' death, the disciples had all kinds of big emotions, and their life circumstances were extremely troublesome. I mean, life was an absolute mess for them, and their hearts were a mess. And Newhouse said, and I agree, I feel like a lot of us today are in a similar situation, a similar mindset. I know for me right now, all of this whole COVID-19 thing has me feeling like overwhelmed by how normal and weird it is at the same time. It's almost like I feel like I'm walking through my life as a dream, where, in a dream when you're in a familiar place, but everything just feels a little bit funky, a little bit off, and it just has this surreal thing where you're like, this isn't quite right. Like, that's how I feel like I'm walking through my days lately, and maybe you are too. But the disciples, like us, had some big emotions and some troubling circumstances that they were walking through. So let's take a look at what that was for the disciples. I mean, they had just had the worst weekend of their entire lives. They were emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually drained. From Thursday night on, their entire world collapsed. Their leader, gone. Their prospects of having a future king to kick out the Romans, shattered. Their good friend Jesus was dead. The brotherhood of these 12 disciples was broken up and scattered. Their reputations were completely raked through the mud. Their resolve to follow Jesus, and they said, "We'll never leave you, Jesus," was totally shaken by the reality of what it meant to be associated with him, and so they had completely broken down. Peter denied Jesus 3 times. Even after he swore he would die before he would deny him. I mean, their very lives are in danger from the high priests and the Pharisees and all the religious leaders. If you were to judge by their life circumstances, you could rightly say that their lives were a dumpster fire. And when Jesus rose again on Sunday, the circumstances of the disciples' lives didn't change. But their joy, their minds, their hearts were changed because of the resurrection. Because of that empty tomb. I mean, their reputations were still trashed. Their lives still in very real danger of persecution. The brotherhood of 12 was completely broken. It would never be the same. Yet, seeing Christ alive, touching his wounds, hearing his voice, seeing the signs that he performed, they would tell you that as of the resurrection, life had never been better. And reputations be darned, it didn't matter. Their life in danger, who cares? No king anymore to kick out the Romans, big deal. One of the brothers betrayed them, done, it's in the past. Because of the resurrection news, even though we might say their life was a dumpster fire, they would say, never had it ever been better. There's one really beautiful piece of evidence that suggests that Jesus really did rise from the dead, and it's how much the disciples changed practically overnight. If we look at how terrified, how cowardly they were on Thursday night when Jesus was arrested, how quickly Peter was to deny even knowing him, and then suddenly, just days later, they're boldly preaching Jesus' victory over death. They're facing torture, they're facing imprisonment, ridicule, stoning, exile. All of them go to a gruesome death or to some very painful ends. And what could possibly make a person like Peter go from this mourning, hiding, denying, doubting mess on Friday morning to then suddenly becoming this emboldened, outspoken, confident, joyful, courageous martyr who is able to speak out even to the point of death? Was it that his life suddenly got better? That his circumstances suddenly changed after the resurrection? No. It was a complete change in his perspective, not a change in his circumstances, that caused Peter, the pebble, to suddenly become rock solid. You see, when Jesus' resurrection reality took hold of Peter's heart, he realized that no earthly thing could be given to him that would be greater than what Jesus had already attained for him. And no earthly loss would be consequential compared with what Jesus had gained for him. No pain would be beyond endurance because the eternal end of pain was now within Peter's sights. Before the cross, we, like Peter, may have measured our lives by how we felt or what we have or what comfort or what status or what personal relationships we could attain, maybe what people thought of us or what we accomplished. But beyond the cross, after the cross, at the empty tomb, we get to measure life so much differently. Now, at the empty tomb, there's no more chasing earthly success. There's no more counting our coins and trying to buy up happiness or security. There's no more checking how many followers we have. There's no more concern about people's public opinion of us. There's no more feeling terribly alone because we know that the Savior is with us wherever we go. There's no more weight of shame and guilt. I mean, how free are we at the empty tomb? How secure are we, even though we may have nothing? How much peace we can have, even when we're standing in the midst of chaos. Becoming a Christian does not mean that our earthly circumstances are suddenly all going to get better. But by walking with Christ, you are guaranteed, and I am guaranteed, to be changed within our circumstances. Last time I shared a message with you, we learned that our broken world is a mess because of sin. It's the sins of all people, of you and me. And so for as long as we walk on this planet, we can expect to feel pain and heartache, to see the symptoms of this ugly sin virus at work on creation, at work on our relationships. And being a Christian doesn't exclude you from that pain or suffering. It doesn't exclude you from being tempted. It doesn't exclude you from being wounded by the brokenness of your sin and the sins of others. But being a Christian does impart to you joy for your journey, peace for your pain, strength for every struggle, hope for your future, contentment even in chaos, and mercy enough to cover every mess you've made. Today's passage is a word of encouragement for people in the middle of difficult circumstances. Not about how to change their situations and make them somehow all rosy and great. It's not a passage about how to pray the right prayer to have an easier time in your temptations of sin. It's not about how to have a more blessed life or how that, everything's going to be better and life is going to be easier. No. Instead, it's a word of encouragement to fight, to struggle, to endure, to ignore shame and judgment from others, to face suffering. So let's take a look quickly here at Hebrews 12, verses 1 and 2. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising its shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. So why do we endure instead of giving up? Why do we sing praise and smile instead of falling into despair? Why do we seek restoration in relationships and holiness and aim for what is perfect in a world that we know is doomed to sin, sick, death? The same reason that Jesus struggled, the same reason that Jesus fought, the same reason that he endured, that he ignored pain, that he faced suffering. Because he knew the end result. The end result is joy. The end result is eternity. The end result is perfection and holiness. The end result of his suffering was salvation for you and for me. The end result of our suffering and his suffering is a harvest of new believers who can be brought closer to God because of our faithfulness and hope and because of what Jesus has already done for them. Passage again, I want to highlight this phrase. It says, and for the joy set before him, Jesus endured the cross, scorning its shame. When we live resurrection lives with that empty tomb as our lens, our filter, we make God's kingdom draw near to those people who are perishing. When we aim for holiness instead of giving into sin, we illustrate what God has prepared us for. Righteousness and good relationships. When we endure sickness and loss, financial struggle, grief, we get to display that unexplainable joy that comes with knowing that these pains are temporary and they will amount to nothing in the blink of an eye at the last day. What a hope we can give the world in the midst of their suffering when we remind them that Jesus died to make all pain come untrue. When we fight against our own sinful tendencies, when we admit our faults, when we ask forgiveness, when we turn away from self-service and selfishness and indulgence and vulgarity and rage and lust and addiction, when we live with the empty tomb in our sights, we get to show the world what God did on the cross and what will be complete in our resurrected bodies. When we do good, when we right wrong, when we fight for justice, when we care for those in need, when we extend the hands of Jesus to those who need healing, by our love, those people, they will come to see and know Jesus, the one who has completed their rescue mission on the cross. That's a beautiful calling that we get to be part of. No longer is our suffering meaningless, but instead, we are never alone in the middle of it. God is by our side and he is redeeming and restoring even in the middle of our mess. He's laying claim over it. He's empowering us through it, and he's drawing more people into his loving embrace by that very suffering. The same way he used Jesus' suffering to draw you and I in, he extends that blessing out further and further until the ends of the earth are reached. You see, the craziest thing about being a follower of Jesus is that no matter how dire your situation, no matter how big the emotions are that you're feeling, no matter what you stand to lose in any given moment, your salvation is unmovable, unshakable. And so even though you are weak, what you rest on is strong. And so you may become weary in doing good, even though you may feel burdened by your sin, even though you may be enduring hostility and anger and frustration because of your faith. Do not give up. Go again to the empty tomb. Remember the joy of eternity that spurred Jesus on to endure the cross for you. Remember the eternity that makes all pain just a moment. Remember the eternity that turns tears of sadness and loss into tears of joy and restoration. This is my prayer for you today. And so now, dear followers of Jesus, the same Jesus whose death is greater than all pain, whose resurrection is greater than all earthly joy, may that same Jesus impart to you joy for your journey, peace for your pain, strength for your struggle, hope for the future, contentment even in chaos, and mercy every morning to cover your mess. May Jesus enable you to shine his light to those who are hurting, so that they too can be empowered to endure until God's kingdom comes and every tear is wiped away. We can live measuring our lives as empty tomb kingdom followers, not as people lost in despair. Praise be to God for that.